nutrition that you eat. We are continuing our discussion on the microbiome. In our previous topic, we talked about how stress impacts the gastrointestinal system and how that can negatively shift the gut microbiome. So today we're going to continue our discussion on the microbiome and ways to improve our microbiome. So just to recap, we talked about the functions of the gut microbiota in the body, the host. It modulates the metabolism, lipid metabolism, glucose metabolism, plays a role in the immune system, gastrointestinal, and CNS physiology. It also has protective functions. So again, this is the gut microbiome and being able to outcompete pathogens and regulates gene expression and aids in digestion and absorption. And it also participates in the production of very important vitamins and other precursor molecules. The gut microbiome produces small molecules. I'll talk about them all the time, called short chain fatty acids. These short chain fatty acids or small molecules can influence the production of some of our neurotransmitters, such as serotonin, which we discussed in our previous topic. So there's a lot that the gut microbiome does to support our overall health. And when we have a loss of the microbial diversity and the composition of microbes within the gastrointestinal tract, these negative shifts in the gut microbiota can be strongly implicated in several disease states, including metabolic diseases such as obesity, type 2 diabetes, atherosclerosis, even just insulin resistance, autoimmunity, arthritis, cancer. These are some other conditions that have been associated with having low diversity, low microbial composition, and even conditions affecting the CNS. Because the health of the microbiome is associated with health, and whenever there's a shift in the gut microbiota, we see the onset of various chronic diseases. The question is there a way we can improve the gut microbiome and have better health, gastrointestinal health, cardiovascular health, etc.? So what we're looking at here is the Hadza Tribe. This is the last hunter-gatherer tribes of Tanzania. And what's really important about this tribe that has been a very important aspect of microbial or microbiome research is that the Hadza Tribe microbiota is substantially more different from that of industrialized countries. And their microbiota changes seasonally based on the fluctuations in their diet. So we understand that the gut microbiome can adapt to various conditions based on the intake of food. And so the Hadza Tribe, their microbiome contains species of bacteria that we don't typically see in the microbiome of people in industrialized worlds. So, and their diet is composed of primarily plant-based. They do have meat in the diet. Is rare, but they do have meat, but the biggest portion of their diet is plant-based. They eat a lot of tubers and fresh berries and green leafy vegetables, fruits, etc. So, and tubers are like a potato, and this is what makes up their diet. And meat is whenever they can catch it, they have meat. They also consume honeycomb, and this is their diet. And because it hasn't been affected by agriculture and processed foods, they tend to have a more stable microbial community, nice abundance of bacteria, species that we don't typically see in industrialized worlds. And this is an analogy of what their microbiome looks like. There's highly diverse, there's a lot of composition, and this is exactly what you want your microbiome to look like, to have the different communities of bacteria. And you also want a nice composition, a nice abundance of these guys. But what we see is this is probably an extreme case here, but this is what the microbiome looks like in a low diverse community, not enough abundance. This is what the microbiome can look like in those of an industrialized world who's just not eating the proper nutrition that would help to sustain these types of microbes. So we've seen throughout the ages the microbiome undergo changes and adaptations in order to match the changes in diet from a hunter-gatherers type diet to one that is devoid of nutrients and low in dietary fiber, etc. We know that there are a number of things that can negatively shift the gut microbiota. And we talked about the birthing method and formula feeding stress, medications, dietary practices such as processed foods, and the livestock and low dietary fiber. And so, we're going to start with what we put in our systems, what we put in our bodies, and how that will shape the type of microbiome that we have in a positive way. Just like the Hadza Tribe have the diversity, have the composition in their microbiome, and we're not able to necessarily eat exactly like the Hadza people, but we can come close. Diet is a key modifiable factor influencing the composition of the gut microbiota, indicating the potential for therapeutic dietary strategies to manipulate microbial diversity, composition, and stability. So when we're thinking about ways to improve the microbiome, and maybe you are one of those people who are stressed and you may not typically eat the type of nutrition that's appropriate for the gut, or maybe you've been on medications, a lot of medications, antibiotics that have impacted and caused a negative shift in the microbiota. If anything that a person needs to do to impact their gut health, in particular the gut microbiome, is to change what you're eating. So a Western diet is typically high in fat, not depicted here, but high in sugar, low fiber. And this kind of nutrition is something that's being connected to dysbiosis and low bacterial diversity. And so when you have this kind of nutrition, it will negatively shift the microbiome to being one that's protective and health promoting and more dysbiotic. And that will lead to an altered gut barrier as well as altered metabolome. We want to consider what we're putting into our systems, what we're putting into our temples, and how that's going to dramatically impact the health not only of ourselves, but the gut bacteria that takes care of us. And so a Westernized diet is characterized as being high in red meat, processed meats as well, sweets, refined sugars, desserts, French fries, low in dietary fiber, antioxidants, and healthy fats. And the component to our diets, we have to understand when we eat food, the food is broken down, is metabolized, and these food-derived metabolites can play a role in our health or be damaging to our health. So trimethylamine oxide is a metabolite of red meat, and it's connected to, it's actually a precursor to cardiovascular disease such as thrombosis or atherosclerosis. So when you're eating foods, keep in mind that these foods break down and they're metabolized, and the metabolites can be either health promoting or very inflammatory and disease promoting. And so that's just one example. And if you look here at a high fiber diet, it tends to be more associated with those commensal or beneficial bacteria that produce these small molecules called short chain fatty acids, and acetate, propionate, and butyrate are those short chain fatty acids. And they tend to be very health promoting and can influence our nervous system, influence the cardiovascular system, and they act locally within the gastrointestinal system to influence the health of the GI tract. So bifidobacterium and faecolibacterium are, for example, are some of those commensal commensal bacteria that are associated with the consumption of a high fiber diet. So when you are considering changing the microbiome, what you put into your body, what you put in your temple will impact the type of microbes that you keep in your intestines. I also like to mention that the foods that are more inflammatory to our health tend to reduce the commensal flora. The Faecalibacterium, for example, is one of them, and Akkermansia is another. For example, those are example bacteria that are beneficial to our health that can be diminished in a Western diet, and their abundance increases with a more of a plant-based diet. So 80% of all antibiotics sold in the US are used to increase the growth in farm animals, and they're present in non-organic meats, eggs, milk, and cheese, and they can lead to antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Within 4 days of broad-spectrum antibiotic treatment, microbiome diversity plummets. Now, antibiotics are extremely helpful and should be used when indicated, but just bear in mind that sometimes they're overprescribed and can lead to problems within the microbiome. And so if you're consuming meat products that are also, you're not only taking the antibiotics for your treatments, but you're eating meat products that are animal-based products that have antibiotics, this can also directly impact the microbiome. But I have good news. There's ways to improve your microbiome, and some of which we've already discussed. So a plant-based diet appears to be beneficial for human health by promoting the development of more and stable microbial systems. Vegans and vegetarians have significantly higher counts of bacteroidetes compared to omnivores. And it makes sense because when you're eating a large plant-based diet, you're going to have more bacteria that ferments plant-based fiber. And so the less fiber you have in a diet, you're going to shift your microbiome. You're going to shift and preferentially select microbes that ferments or break down that type of food, the diet that you're primarily consuming. Another component to the plant-based diet are polyphenols. These are plant bioactive constituents that can increase bifidobacterium and lactobacillus. These are beneficial commensal bacteria of the gastrointestinal tract, which provide anti-pathogenic and anti-inflammatory effects and cardiovascular protection. So when you eat of the rainbow, folks, if you eat all of the different colors, your reds, your purples, your blues, your greens, your oranges, all of these different colors, you are getting an array of polyphenols. And I want to go back to the Hadza Tribe, because one of the reasons why their microbiome shifts with their diet is because we're supposed to eat with the seasons. We're supposed to change our nutrition. A lot of people eat the same types of foods all throughout the year. And we're actually, to increase the abundance and composition of the gut microbiome, we have to introduce variety in the diet. It is extremely, extremely important. And so when you're eating a plant-based diet, you want to make sure to increase the abundance and the variety of different fruits and vegetables that you're consuming, because it will aid in the abundance and of the microbiome, the gut microbiome, and the composition of bacteria that you have. So that's another reason to eat of the rainbow, so that you can increase the diversity within the gut microbiome. But you're also benefiting from the polyphenols that has been shown to substantially increase the beneficial bacteria, such as bifido and lactobacillus. So dietary polyphenols, modulate the gut microbiome composition and function. And something else that's really, really important is that it interferes with bacterial quorum sensing. This is how bacteria communicate. And so if you do have some pathogenic bacteria, potentially pathogenic bacteria in the gut that is overgrowing because you don't have enough of the beneficial bacteria, by the consumption of polyphenols introduced into the diet, you can interfere with their communities increase their ability to communicate. Polyphenols have multiple mechanisms of action, not only within just the human gut microbiota, but polyphenols have an array of anti-inflammatory effects and can be extremely cardiovascular protective. So we talked about the certain components or constituents within a plant-based diet that can benefit the growth of certain beneficial bacteria. It's important to note here that patients with obesity and arthritis tend to have a decreased abundance of Bacteroides, Firmicutes, and Bifidobacterium. And remember in my previous slide, Lactobacillus and Bifidobacterium species of bacteria can be increased by the consumption of polyphenols within the diet. So if you're a person who has a little bit of extra weight on you, you're falling into that obese category, or you have arthritis, you might have a decreased abundance of these commensal bacteria. This has been associated with these populations. And so by introducing polyphenols into the diet, you'll not only benefit from the increased abundance in your beneficial bacteria, Bifidobacterium or Bacteroides, but you will also benefit from the anti-inflammatory effects that the polyphenols will exert. And so sometimes comorbidities that are traveling with these conditions, such as cardiovascular disease. And so for that reason, make sure that you're incorporating more berries into the diet, more dark leafy greens and more legumes, more fiber, because this is a type of nutrition that good bacteria of the gut requires. So this was interesting. Researchers looked at dietary polyphenols in promoting the growth of Akkermansia. Akkermansia is a very, very important beneficial bacteria that is connected to a lot of metabolic diseases. And by consuming polyphenols, you are enhancing the production of Akkermansia. This was a study that looked at black elderberry extract. 300 milligrams twice daily increases Akkermansia. And this is because elderberry contains those very, very potent bioactive constituents called polyphenols, and our commensal bacteria do require them as substrates in order to enhance their growth. Dietary polyphenols, this is just one food constituent. We do have many others, and I know I talk a lot about nutrition, folks, and I'm not a nutritionist, but this is how I practice medicine, and I start by what we put into the body, because it will dramatically influence your health, from the gut microbiome to your cardiovascular system, your central nervous system, your mood, your behavior, cancer development. What we put into our temples can really drive us closer to having one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel, or closer to Jesus. So I'm going to talk a lot about nutrition. If you haven't noticed, I talk a lot about nutrition, but it's because what we put into our bodies impact our health. And I see it clinically, I see it personally. And so I will always talk about the nutrition impact our health, because God has given us so much of abundance of good things to eat. And it's a shame that it's so much available, but in terms of variety, and but some people just really don't know how beneficial healthy nutrition is. So dietary polyphenols, when you consume these plant bioactives, and as I mentioned, there's so many other plant bioactives. It's not just dietary polyphenols, but we had, this is just one class of phytonutrients inside the plants. Once they come into the gut, they have the ability to modulate the gut microbiota. And I just showed an example just of Akkermansia and Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus, but we have other bacteria that benefits from these polyphenols. And when they come into the gut and modulate the gut microbiome, they promote the growth and production of these bacteria. And in this case is Akkermansia. And if we enhance the production of Akkermansia, we are enhancing barrier integrity, because the role of Akkermansia in the gut, and we'll talk about it, and the immune response is immunomodulatory. And then these beneficial bacteria also play a role in maintaining the balance of other microbes. And downstream effects in terms of the systemic effects, it enhances insulin sensitivity, it's anti-inflammatory. So Akkermansia has multiple mechanisms that directly impacts the gut locally, but it also has some systemic effects. So the role of Akkermansia in the gut is to modulate the immune system, regulate intestinal permeability and gut barrier function. So when we think about the health of the gastrointestinal tract, we are thinking about the intestinal barrier. It's what keeps some things from entering our bloodstream and causing systemic effects, either to the cardiovascular system, to the liver, to the brain, to our adipose tissue, etc. And Akkermansia in particular, decreased levels of Akkermansia has been associated with insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, obesity, metabolic syndrome, inflammatory bowel disease, autoimmunity. I see a lot of things change. There's studies looking at Akkermansia supplementation for type 2 diabetes, and I see amazing things happen in terms of people's insulin levels, their fasting blood glucose levels, and hemoglobin A1C. Akkermansia can dramatically influence and impact metabolic health. When you work on addressing the gut, when you work on addressing the low abundance of these commensal bacteria, you can see shifts in your overall health, because we understand that the gut, we're seeing now based on the research that's using high throughput technology, DNA sequencing, that the gut microbiome, it can dramatically influence various disease states, endocrine system, thyroid, your impacting your mood, depression, anxiety, even neuropsychiatric disorders such as schizophrenia and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. We're seeing how the gut is connected to a lot of different conditions. And a lot of it has to do with decreased abundance of beneficial bacteria. And one in case examples, Akkermansia. So when we're shifting the gut microbiome to be a more health promoting, I talked about polyphenols, but the other component is fiber, and fiber is a very important aspect of a plant-based diet, and it provides the substrate for the bacteria to ferment in order to produce the small molecules that they're able to produce, like the short chain fatty acids. But I mentioned there's a metabolic factory within the gut microbiome in the colon, and they're also producing vitamins as well. When you eat this kind of nutrition, the bacteria is able to confer their beneficial effects on our body. And we see when we have a very healthy gut barrier, that's usually influenced by the type of bacteria that you keep in the gastrointestinal system, and then also direct impact that the fiber has on the gastrointestinal system. We see better cell metabolism and a better balanced microbiome or microbiota homeostasis, and anti-proliferation is some of the exerted effects that fiber has on our health, and immunomodulation, being able to modulate the immune system, balance our immune response, and then the benefit of the anti-inflammatory effects that fiber has on our body. So there are both direct and indirect mechanisms as to how fiber benefits us, but in particular, the gut microbiome requires fiber. And for this reason, they produce, as I mentioned, the short chain fatty acids, and these fatty acids are involved in energy metabolism, appetite regulation, glucose homeostasis, lipid oxidation, and the gut mucosal integrity. So when you eat green leafy vegetables, legumes, beans, nuts, seeds, eat of the rainbow, you're helping your gastrointestinal gut flora to produce these short chain fatty acids that are able to modulate and affect your metabolism. If you have a balanced gut, guess what? You won't have to deal with obesity in some cases. You will have better weight management. You will have better cardiovascular health if you work on your gut microbiome. You will have better hormone balance and gut health. So we want to keep in mind what we put into our bodies can really drive the type of microbes microbes that we have. This study looked at how rapidly the diet can change. The microbiome can change. Within 48 hours, you can shift the microbiome by just changing the type of nutrition that you eat. It didn't matter in this case, plant-based versus animal-based nutrition. They still saw a shift within the microbiome, but we know that the best type of nutrition for the gut bacteria tend to be more plant-based. Another study looked at high fiber and fermented foods, and they saw an increase in overall microbial composition and activity when you eat high fiber, you eat fermented foods. But what's interesting, they also looked at another endpoint, which was the immune response, the immune system. And fermented foods actually was shown to reduce and modify immune responses more than a high fiber diet. But the point here is that you still need to eat the fiber that's necessary to help increase the microbial composition and the activity of the gut, because the commensal bacteria require fermentable fiber. So prebiotics are a substrate that is selectively utilized by host microorganisms, conferring a health benefit. So their fiber comes in two forms. You have insoluble and you have soluble, but soluble fiber is the fiber that has been shown to significantly influence the abundance and diversity of the gut microbiome, and anywhere between 3 to 5 grams per day of prebiotic foods. And so when you're considering a prebiotic food, keep in mind that these foods have certain types of fibers, galacto-oligosaccharides, fructo-oligosaccharides, oligofructose, inulin, beta-glucans, pectins, for example. These are the types of soluble fermentable fiber that the bacteria can use in order to produce those short-chain fatty acids. And they tend to be found in foods like this, like the allium family of vegetables, the onions, your garlics. You also have leeks, asparagus, your legumes, your beans are high in the galacto-oligosaccharides. And so these kinds of, this kind of nutrition, the fructose oligosaccharides, your berries, this kind of nutrition will help to produce the short chain fatty acids and serve as fermentable fiber. And there's so many more, but these types of foods tend to have these types of fiber constituents. Pectins are in your citrus fruits. I personally like modified citrus pectin, and I put that inside water or put it in smoothie. It's best taken on an empty stomach. It is a soluble fiber and it's a very anti-neoplastic powder. I really like modified citrus pectin. There's so many studies on modified citrus pectin in all types of cancers and being able to downregulate galactin-3 protein, which tends to be affiliated with certain pathways in the development of certain cancers. And it's also a detoxifier. So there's some of the fibers can have multiple mechanisms of action aside from just aiding in the production of enhancing our commensal flora. They can also have downstream effects in being able to bind up and chelate toxins and modify citrus pectin. I personally I love it, and it helps with so many various things aside from the gut bacteria. Probiotics are often used to help change and shift the microbiome. They're technically considered live microorganisms when administered in adequate amounts and can confer a health benefit on the host. And just to extend that point to confer a health benefit to the host, Bifidobacterium lactis HN19 has been shown to increase neutrophil phagocytosis and natural killer cell activity in elderly. So elderly population tend to be more at risk for infections and cancer. And so sometimes that is a population that can prophylactically consider probiotics for that reason. Lactobacillus plantarum Heal9 and Lactobacillus paracasei 8700 has been shown to reduce the common cold, and Lactobacillus rhamnosus has been considered as a prophylactic measure to reduce the incidence of colon tumors. So when indicated, probiotics can be incredibly helpful to the host and in the treatment of various conditions and the prevention of various conditions, but when used appropriately. So you want to consider a high potent evidence-based probiotic. And what I mean by that is I know a lot of people use probiotics, but Sometimes I've had to take patients off probiotics because it was not applicable for their condition. So when you're considering a probiotic, it's always important to check the literature, check with your provider to see if the probiotic is indicated for your condition. Have you seen a studies in the literature on, 50 billion CFUs of lactobacillus rhamnosus in the treatment of X condition? So VSL3, for example, is quite useful for IBS, and they've actually done studies on that, and IBD. So you have to check your probiotic against the literature, to research to see if it's appropriate for you. Good probiotics going to be multi-strain and species. And for another discussion, we'll talk about how to look at probiotics and be able to read the nomenclature. Effective doses range from 100 million to 50 billion. And again, it depends on why you're using probiotics, but they can be incredibly valuable and helping to shift the microbiome and influence the downstream